Want to learn how to do a radio-ready production using only Logic Pro? Today, I'm going to show you how to go from this
burning down a road I've yet to know.
To this.
Burning down a road I've yet to know.
Using only Logic Pro stock plugins. Hello everyone, this is Dylan with Musician on a Mission, here today with another mix tutorial for you. So vocals are the most important part of the mix. Everyone knows this. It's what the listener focuses on throughout the track. So getting your vocal chain right is essential to a radio-ready song. So keep watching, and don't forget to download the free vocal mixing cheat sheet. It covers the most important parts of this video, plus we added our 3 favorite techniques to create thicker vocals. It's a fantastic reference to keep by your side while doing your own vocal production. Click the link in the description below to grab it. Alright, before we start, I have to give a disclaimer. I'm going to give you a lot of tips in this video, but you have to remember, use your ears. These are only recommendations. Every voice is different, and I'm only doing what's best for this person's particular voice. So do what fits your voice the best, and use what I'm telling you more as recommendations, more as guidelines, and not as hard rules. Okay, so the first step to doing a vocal production using only Logic Pro stock plugins is gain automation. Now that's not necessarily what you would expect the first step to be. So one of the biggest issues with vocals is the fact that they're very dynamic. Now that's great for some genres like jazz or classical or folk, where the point of them is to be very dynamic, but in most popular genres, stuff that shows up on the radio, you need to have a more consistent vocal sound, something that's more dynamically consistent so that the processing remains the same the whole time, so that it's not overly compressed 1 second and too little compressed in the next second. So gain automation sounds like a more confusing concept than it actually is. Really, all it is making sure that the gain of each of these little sections, all right here, is fairly consistent. So you can see, even just by looking at the waveform, this is quieter than this, which is louder than this, which is quieter than this, so on and so forth. So all we want to do is go forth, separate all of them, and change up the gain. So there's an easier way to do this. So if you go down to this little drop-down box, the toolbar, and go to Remove Silence, you can actually just separate all of these vocal clips into their own little sections so that you can adjust the gain accordingly. Now, you might have to go down here, change up the threshold. I'm not doing much to actually get rid of the silence. I want to keep the breaths in. I want to keep all of the sound of the vocal itself. I'm just basically wanting to separate each of these little vocal chunks. So I might need to change my minimum time. Might need to change my pre-attack time. It depends on your vocal's needs. But this one's pretty good for me. I'm looking at it. It's looking pretty good. So I'm going to hit OK. You can see that it's separated all of these into little individual regions. So I can go in and change the gain of these individual regions. To change the gain, we're going to need to go in, hit this little drop-down box, and you can actually change the gain right here of one individual region. So for instance, if I turn this up, let's make it drastic, 10 decibels, you can see it gets really loud in the waveform, but it doesn't affect anything else. It's just this one little bit. So you can honestly just eyeball this. It doesn't have to be exact. I can obviously tell that this region is much quieter than this region. I don't need to go and measure each one with a VU meter and make sure that it's exactly the same volume. So if I was to go very quickly, I might say, this one's fine. This one's maybe a little loud. This one's a little quiet. Increase that by 4. This one's fine, this one's a little loud, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to do all of it because we're really only going to listen to a few bars of this song. But you can do that pretty quickly. It's maybe a 5-minute step. So the next thing you're going to want to do is surgical EQ. That's step 2, surgical EQ. So what is surgical EQ? If you're just getting into mixing, there is a difference between what we call tonal EQ and surgical EQ. Surgical EQ is where you are doing an EQ sweep, which I'll talk about in a second. You're doing an EQ sweep and cutting out any of the nasty stuff you hear. Like if you hear something and it's just like, oh, that sticks out, that sounds gross, it's louder, that's probably room resonances, room nodes, parts of the vocal that may be cracked up, parts of the walls around you that are sounding very strange when you're recording in your bedroom or in a studio. You're going to want to cut that out, and it's going to be usually a much steeper cut and a much narrower cut. What you're also going to do is do some low end filtering to get rid of some of the rumble that just happens naturally in the low end of the frequency spectrum that'll help to clean up your vocal track. So the first thing we're going to do is do this EQ sweep. So I'm going to boost my vocals pretty dang high, and I'm going to increase the Q so that it's fairly small. We'll say around 2. That means it's targeting a specific part of the frequency spectrum. And an EQ sweep is literally just that. It is sweeping around the frequency spectrum to hear something gross. So I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to sweep around until I hear something that's sticking out to me.
Burning down a road I've yet to know. Memories calling.
Okay, I'm hearing something around here that's really sticking out to me. Yeah, right there. So I'm going to take it down, and I'm actually going to increase the Q even a little bit more, just to take that rogue frequency out. Now, it's not necessarily something you're going to hear incredibly audibly. Once we do all of our vocal processing, it's going to be much more obvious that you've taken out one of these frequencies, or rather, it's going to be much more obvious that you haven't taken out problematic frequencies. The point of this is actually that that problem doesn't show up. So it's a lot more smooth. It's a lot more subtle. So the next thing we're going to do, and I was talking about this earlier, is we are going to add a high pass filter. All that means is that we're letting the highs pass through, and we are filtering out the low end. And we're really just going to be filtering out below the vocal itself. We're not trying to cut into the sound of the vocal really at all. We're just trying to get some of the rumble that happens naturally in the room. So I'll hit play.
Burning down a road I've yet to know.
I'd say around there is fine. Again, it's not necessarily something you're going to be able to audibly hear, but once you start compressing your vocal, it's going to be a little bit more obvious. We just want to get rid of it now. So step 3, and this is optional, but it's still important if you need it, and that is de-essing. So let's bring up Logic Pro's de-esser right here. So what de-essing is, it is the process of getting rid of sibilants. So if I'm saying a lot of S's, a lot of K's or P's or stuff like that, this is going to be targeting those frequencies in the frequency spectrum specifically and turning them down so that they're not crazy loud whenever you're processing your vocals. Not all vocals need this. Don't do it just because you think you have to. If it doesn't need it, it doesn't need it. So here's how you use this. We are going to change the monitor to the detector, which is this section right here. And we're going to listen around for where the S's are in this vocalist's vocal. And I'm going to loop a section with a lot of S's in it so that it's a little bit more obvious. I'm actually going to solo it as well. So you hear that static. There it is, right around there. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to turn my monitor back to the regular vocal.
Static.
And we are going to, first off, we're going to put the suppressor at the same place. Now, the detector is just basically finding the frequency that's a problem. The suppressor is what's actually compressing that little section of the frequency spectrum. So we're going to want to turn the sensitivity up a little bit.
Static.
We're specifically wanting the activity light to light up only on S's and nothing else. So I'm going to adjust the sensitivity until that's the only time it's lighting up.
Static.
So we saw it light up right there.
Burning down a road I've yet to know.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty good. Let's change the strength. It's a little too harsh for me. So I'm going to say, let's just take it down to 6.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
That's better for me.
Static.
It's a little bit more natural. Let's listen in context.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
Perfect. You hear how those sibilances have all gotten lowered just to a regular level. So the next step is step 4, which is compression. So most people, when they record and mix vocals, they're going to use some kind of compression in order to make the vocal more consistent dynamically. We actually talked about that earlier with gain automation. Most people will use a single compressor. I actually don't do this. I use 2, sometimes even 3, sometimes even 4 compressors on my vocals. That's because I use a system called serial compression. And this is a big secret of the pros. A lot of pros do this, and it really helps to make a vocal sound natural while still getting a lot of gain reduction. So serial compression, the reason you do this is that whenever you have a single compressor, and let's say you're compressing 5 or 10 or even 15 dBs of gain reduction, that's a lot of compression, and you're going to hear it in the vocal. It's going to be very obvious that it's been processed, that it sounds unnatural, that it sounds too harsh. It might even start distorting. But whenever you split up the compression over a few different compressors, all of a sudden it sounds a lot more natural, it sounds a lot more smooth. You're still getting the same level of gain reduction, you're still getting that same dynamic consistency, but it's not nearly as aggressive and harsh as it would the other way around. So there's actually 2 different kinds of compressors that you're going to use. The first is a dynamic compressor. So a dynamic compressor is meant to compress the attack. It's not necessarily meant to change the tone of the vocal, it's just meant to control the dynamics overall. So what we're going to do is we are going to play the vocal and we're going to listen, and we're going to have a fast attack, we're going to have pretty fast release, and just a little bit of gain reduction, not too much. So let's listen. I'm going to start the attack off pretty high and just slowly move down till I like it. Make this more obvious for me. I'm like around there. Let's make this ratio a little bit smaller. And we'll turn that back down. Great, so this is only supposed to have, 1, 2, maybe 3 dBs of compression. It's supposed to be pretty light. It's only meant to level the vocal out. It's not meant to be aggressive, especially for this type of vocal. It's a pop vocal, but it's still very intimate. It's still very sweet. So what I'm actually going to do, and this is something that's specific to Logic Pro's compressor plugin, and I love it, is I'm going to add just a hint of distortion. Their distortion, it's not really distortion, so to say, as much as it is color. It's saturation. It just adds like a little bit of niceness, a little bit of sweetness to the vocal. Now, usually I'll do this on my tonal compressor, but I'm just feeling like doing it on here today. So let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, I like that. I'm actually going to turn the makeup gain down just a hair, because adding distortion turns the volume up. Usually you'll turn the makeup gain up to compensate for the volume you're losing, but with adding a little bit of this distortion, you turn that down just a bit. Moving on to our next compressor, which is our tonal compressor. That's the second compressor in the serial compression concept. Now, the point of this is actually to change the tone of the vocal. You're wanting to not only level out the vocal, but you're wanting to make the vocal just like sound a little beefier, a little more consistent, a little bit more powerful. I'm going to go and use one of Logic Pro's different emulations. These are all different emulations of classic analog compressors that are pretty beloved. I'm going to use the vintage Opto. Now, this is based off of the LA2A compressor. It's one of my favorite vocal compressors in the world. I love it. I use vintage Opto on a ton of my vocals. It's very sweet. It's very nice. And we are going to try to get a slower attack. The last attack was really, really fast. We're going to try to get a little bit of a slower one. And then I'm actually going to put the release on auto. And the auto button just means that the compressor itself is measuring where to let go of the compressor, where to go back to 0. And for stuff like this, where, it's more meant to shape the tone, I'm totally fine with that. I'm just going to let the compressor do its thing. Let's turn this up to about 3 and see what this sounds like. Turn this up, make it a little bit more obvious. pretty good. Let's turn this way back down.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know. Static.
Okay, so that's sounding good. I kind of want a little bit more dynamic control on this. So I'm actually going to copy this. Actually, first, I'm going to need to add a little bit of a makeup gain. That would have been bad.
Static.
Yeah, just to make sure that it's sounding about
Static. Static.
perfect, about the same volume. So I'm going to just duplicate this. Here we go. I'm going to just duplicate it. And I now have two compressors that are exactly the same. And I'm going to make sure that I'm getting the same amount of gain reduction.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
A little bit more.
Static.
Perfect. So let's listen to before and after.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know. Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
So it's sounding a little bit more dynamically consistent. It's sounding a little bit more thick, a little bit more powerful. So let's move on to the next step, which is step 5, tonal EQ. Now this EQ is meant to improve the tone of the vocal itself. It's meant to change how the vocal sounds. You know, the first EQ was meant to just take out the gross stuff. This is meant to enhance the vocal. So rather than using the channel EQ, which is just a digital EQ, it's pretty cold, it's pretty exact, we are actually going to use, let's grab this vintage tube EQ. We are going to use Logic's vintage EQ selection. Now this is actually a cool new feature of Logic that they put out in one of the recent updates. So this particular vintage EQ is based off of the Pultec EQ, which is an EQ that is used in a ton of studios all over the world. It sounds amazing on vocals. I'm a big fan. We are going to go in, make some wide boosts, some slightly wider cuts, and really make sure that this vocal is sounding good. First things first, I'm actually going to give this a little bit of air. Let's get rid of this. Now what that means is I'm going to boost some of the top end to just make it feel a little bit more shimmery. So I'm going to go over to, let's say, the high boost, and I'm going to turn that up really high, make the bandwidth quite a bit wider, and I'm just going to sweep around up in the top end of the frequency spectrum, and we are going to see what sounds best.
Static.
Obviously real harsh at first, but we're going to turn it down.
Burning down a road I've yet to know. Static. Burning down a road
Sounds pretty good
I've
to me.
yet to know. Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
You know, this vocal feels like it could actually use just a hint of low end. So I'm going to go to this low peak, and we're going to boost that up to 10, same as before, and sweep around, see if this could use a little something.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know. Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
Okay, you know, I'm hearing a little bit of harshness up there at the top, so I'm going to go in with my dip. Again, I'm going to dip it all the way, and I'm just going to sweep around until I find something.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
That sounds pretty good.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
Good, that takes that out. And you know, I'm wanting just a little bit more presence. And the presence area of the frequency spectrum is kind of 1 kilohertz to roughly 6 kilohertz. So I'm going to use this high frequency right here, this high peak. Same thing, boost it up to 10, sweep around, see if we can find something interesting.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
Great, so this is sounding pretty good to me. So let's listen before.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
And after.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
I actually boost this up a bit.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
So that's sounding just a little bit more balanced, a little bit more enhanced to me. So I'm going to move on from there to step 6, which is saturation. This is another one of those optional, see if it works for you kind of things. Everything from here on out is actually going to be on a send. So let's go over here. I've actually got them pre-made. And first off, let's talk about what saturation is, because there's a big amount of confusion around the difference between distortion, saturation, overdrive. And, you know, I could spend an hour talking about this, but the main difference is that distortion is usually digital. It usually is a lot harsher. It's a lot more aggressive. Saturation is usually pretty soft. It's meant to fatten. It's meant to thicken. Saturation is what comes from using old analog equipment, you know, like these old compressors or old EQs. You know, whenever you put a lot of gain through those old compressors, those old EQs, that would cause them to overload their systems. And it would usually give like a nice musical effect. So we're going to actually try to replicate that effect. Now, Logic has not, for a very long time, has not had a great saturation system, a good saturation plugin. They've had great distortion, not great saturation. So they've actually just now created Fat FX. It's not usually used for vocals. It's used for other things, but the distortion section, which has some saturation, is fantastic. I love it. It's really simple. You don't get as much control as I would like, but it sounds great. So we're going to use that. Now, first things first, you're going to want to go and just turn everything off. You don't really need anything but the distortion section. And also make sure it's on. That's important. Now, I'm going to turn this all the way up, and I'm going to make sure that I'm sending all of my level that I need to this send, because we want to make sure that this is mixed in parallel. We don't want it to be on the track itself. We want to be able to mix it in subtly once we get the tone that we like. So let's see what this soft saturation sounds like.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
It's not really aggressive. It's honestly pretty subtle, but it just thickens it up nicely. You obviously don't need 100%. You can go back.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to.
That sounds good to me. Now, I also like the exciter distortion in here. Exciters are usually happening on more the top end of the sound source that you're using. Saturation tends to be more in kind of the lows, the low mids, the mids. Exciters more on the top end. So let's see what that sounds like.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
So that's sounding pretty good to me. It's giving it some good low mids thickness. It's giving it some good high end brightness. Now, I obviously do not want this to be all the way up. It's very loud. So we're going to turn that down. And what we're going to do is we're going to subtly mix it in. And once it sounds good to my ears, I'm going to take it back just a hair.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know. Static,
Yeah, nice and subtle like that.
burning down a road I've yet to know.
Great, that sounds good to my ears. So you can see I'm not really putting that much in at all, just a little bit. But it's adding just a nice, again, a nice thickness, a nice brightness. All of the processing you're doing on the vocals is honestly subtle. It's the fact that you're doing so many small things together that really makes it sound good. That really makes it sound like a radio-ready vocal. So let's move on to the next step, which is step 7, and that's going to be our stereo slapback delay. Now, this is actually a pretty good trick for doing pop vocals, for doing rock vocals, for doing any kind of vocal that you want to be really close to the listener. You know, you don't necessarily want it to be really pushed back in the mix. You want it to be right up front, right on top, sitting on top of the mix. Now, what this is, and again, I'm going to make sure that I've got that all the way up. A stereo slapback is just a very, very fast delay that happens at different times in the left channel and the right channel. So, a regular slapback is just a single slapback. It'd be like da-da, da-da, very, very quick. Stereo slapback is more like da-da-da. But you're going to mix it in so quietly, it's just going to add a nice sense of space around the vocal so that it doesn't stick out quite so much. So right now, I'm going to actually just turn these up. It's going to sound pretty strange for a bit, and we're going to see what this sounds like. Very weird, as you can tell.
Burning down a road I've yet to know. Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know.
That's good. So usually I time my delays to the actual BPM of the track. For right now, because this is just an example, I'm not going to do that. But this is sounding pretty good to my ears. Usually with a stereo slapback delay, you're going to be doing somewhere between 50 milliseconds and 150 milliseconds, maybe even 200 milliseconds. And you're going to have the left delay and the right delay be somewhere between 20 and 50 milliseconds apart from each other. So you can see I've got 28 milliseconds. Now I'm going to have just a little bit of feedback. You really don't want more than 10%. Honestly, I'm going to decrease that. You can even have 0%. I like having just a little bit because it smooths it out. You can also take out some of the lows to help it mix in. So like that. And take out some of the highs to help it mix in as well.
Static.
Great. So let's play this, mix it in quietly.
Static. Burning down a road I've yet to know. Static.
That sounds good to me. So again, the point isn't to hear it audibly. The point isn't for the listener to be able to listen to it and say, oh, there's a slapback delay on that. The point is just to give it a sense of space, to make it feel more like it's in the same space as everything else. So simple as that. Let's move on. So the next step is optional again, and that is reverb. So if you're mixing a song that's a little bit more natural or a little bit more vibey, let's say, you might absolutely want reverb. Again, your jazz, your folk, your classical. Vocal reverb is making a huge comeback in indie. Even pop and rock oftentimes uses reverb. The big problem with reverb on vocals is that it pushes the vocals back in the mix. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to push it back horribly, but usually it creates a sense of space that's a little bit too obvious to the ear. Now, for these vocals in particular, I actually want some reverb. Like, it's sounding just a hair too dry to me. Now, I'm actually using stems from a mix I did a few years back. So the first thing I'm going to do is add just the room reverb that I used on the entire mix. This is a whole different concept that I can get into in another video, but just for the sake of keeping it consistent with my mix, I'm going to add that. Now that's already all mixed in. I don't need to do much of anything.
Static. Burning down a road.
So let's add an actual vocal reverb. Now, the vocal reverb that I want to use, and I'm using the Space Designer plugin, I'm going to create a reverb that is fairly long, but it's also pretty quiet. It's only there just to add, like I said, just a little bit of vibe, just a little bit of texture to the vocal. So right now, this is the reverb that I've created before the video.
Static.
I'll turn it up so it's more obvious.
Burning down a road I've yet to know.
So let's go over what I've done. First off, I've added a little bit of a pre-delay, and I've actually timed it to the BPM of the song. Let's see what this is. Yeah, roughly 47. So pre-delay basically starts the reverb a little bit after a piece of audio actually goes into the system, rather than the reverb starting right when the vocals start. And that actually is very, very good if you're trying to separate your vocal from your reverb, if you're trying to keep your vocal a little bit farther in the front of the mix. So I'll usually do somewhere between 25 to 75 milliseconds. But again, timing it to your BPM is fantastic, and luckily Logic actually has a button to do just that. So for the length, this is just the length that felt good to me. I actually moved it forward, I moved it back. I really tried to find where it fit best inside of the mix. And to me, 2 seconds was perfect. And that was really all I did for this particular reverb. I also picked a vocal plate. Now there's lots of different types of reverbs. In Logic specifically, there's rooms, there's halls, there's plate reverbs, spring reverbs, there's even just extra random spaces that they've sampled. So plate reverbs are these big plates that studios used to have where you would basically run your sound through them and they'd vibrate, and they'd have a little pickup that would pick up the vibrations of that plate, and they would use that as their reverb. This is before digital reverb ever existed. For whatever reason, plate reverbs just sound really, really good on vocals. You can try out all the different kinds of reverbs that you want. They're all going to have a different tone. For me, my favorite, especially for this kind of sweet pop vocal, I love plate reverbs. So this is the reverb that I went with. Let's listen to it again.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
Now let's mix it in very subtly.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know. Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
Right about there. Perfect. So right now, the vocal's got a nice sense of space. It's feeling like it's fitting in with the mix. It's more dynamically consistent. It's more tonally consistent. We are almost done. One of the last steps, again, this is optional. I love doing it on my vocals, is actually adding just a little bit of modulation to give it a little bit more vibe, to give it a little bit more of a stereo presence. And specifically when I say modulation, this could mean a lot of different things. It could mean phasing, it could mean flanging, it could mean using some weird effects that you've created on your own or you've gotten from different companies. I'm going to use chorus. Chorus is kind of the classic effect, and it's great. Again, it's really, really great to mix it in subtly. Now, the chorus plugin that I love is Ensemble from Logic. They've got two different chorus plugins. The other one's a lot simpler, but I just think this one sounds better. And I love using the doubler preset. It's really simple. It's literally just the random line set at 2.7 hertz, 39% intensity. You want to make sure that your output mix is all the way. That's because we're mixing this in parallel. It's not going directly on the channel itself. We're making sure that it's just going to be in really, really quiet, ever so quietly in there, just to spread the vocal out a little bit. Now let's listen to what this sounds like.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
So pretty weird, right? But when you mix it in quietly, it's real good. Let's listen.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know. Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
Just like that. So simple. Now, as I said, we're almost done. We've pretty much mixed this. We've gone through and we've done our EQs, we've done our de-essing, we've done our compression, we've added our space, we've added our saturation, we've even added a little bit of modulation. Now, the last step for vocals is your volume automation. Really, really simple. You're just wanting to turn up any words that are getting lost in the mix and turn down any words that are sticking out of the mix. So in order to do that, we're going to want to open up our automation lane. I do this by pressing A on the keyboard, and you can see already that volume has been set for you. So I'm going to go in, I can turn this up,
Static,
or I can turn it down. Really, really quietly. Now, there's actually a better way to do automation. I'm going to just get rid of this. There's a better way to do automation, and that's with your marquee tool. Right here, you can see I have it selected. If you hold down Command, you can see how my pointer is changing to this little cross. If you hold down the marquee tool, you can actually select one particular region, and if you click it after taking the Command key off, it creates a little piece of automation just for that section. That means that you don't have to draw in your automation like I just did, like this, for every single word you're wanting to turn up and down. It's a huge time saver. I'd absolutely recommend using that. So let's listen through and see if there's any words that are sticking out.
Static, burning down a road I've yet yet to know.
I'd actually say no is just a little bit too quiet. So we're going to just turn it up like that. Let's see what that sounds like.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know.
Now I'd also say that the ms right here, that's a little too quiet, and all of it is a little too quiet. Let's see what this sounds like.
Static, burning down a road I've yet to know. Memories.
Same thing here. This is just a little bit too quiet.
Memories calling me to come back home.
That's a little bit too quiet. So you're kind of starting to get the picture. Luckily, this song is fairly repetitive, but a lot of songs, it's not going to be, the exact same automations on every single stanza, every single line. It's going to be some words are sticking out, some words are a little bit too quiet. This is really nitpicky. You're going to need to go through and make sure that you're grabbing every single little thing. This might seem unnecessary to you. This is the final step that all people who get on the radio, all of their engineers do. It's really just to make sure it's fitting in the pocket. It's really making sure that there's not anything that's sticking out. All of the compression you've done, all the gain automation you've already done, you've gotten it to where all you have to do is 1 dB moves here, 1 dB moves there. Nothing really too drastic at all. If you hadn't done any of that compression, you'd be moving these things up a lot larger. But that's really it. We've gone through not that many steps. It's something that you can do really quickly, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes. It becomes muscle memory. So just to go through again what we did. Gain automation, surgical EQ, we used our de-esser, serial compression, so we used a dynamic compressor first and then a tonal compressor, tonal EQ, saturation send, stereo slapback delay. We added just a little bit of reverb, chorus effect, and we added just a little bit of volume automation. So let's try this again. Let's see what this sounded like unmixed.
Burning down a road I've yet to know.
Now let's see what it sounded like mixed.
Burning down a road I've yet to know.
And that is it. If you follow these steps, you'll be able to create radio-ready vocals just like you hear out in the world. You'll be able to make your songs sound like the stuff you hear on the radio. So I want to know, what's been the most challenging thing for you in your vocal processing? Has it been compression? Has it been EQ? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to download the free vocal mixing cheat sheet. It's got even more tips to make your vocals sound like the pros. Click the link in the description below to grab it. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That's all from me. This has been Dylan with Musician on a Mission. And remember, create regardless.